They ripped open his suitcase in front of everyone, spilled confidential documents across the airport floor, and laughed. "Probably stolen," one of them said, loud enough for the whole gate to hear. No apology, no shame, just a black teenager in a hoodie, surrounded by whispers, judged not by what he carried, but by the color of his skin. They didn't check his credentials, didn't ask his name, didn't know he was the reason their flight was even taking off. Because buried beneath the smirks and condescension was a $120 million truth they were seconds from learning. The boy they dismissed owned the very airline they worked for. But he didn't fight back. Not yet. He was waiting, watching, recording every word. Because sometimes the most powerful seat on the plane isn't first class. It's the one no one saw coming. What would you have done if you saw it happen? Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop a comment, hit like if this shook you, and subscribe, because the moment the truth hits, you won't believe who gets grounded next. The airport buzzed with the usual rhythm of chaos. Rolling luggage wheels clicked against the polished tiles, voices echoed over loudspeakers, and the low roar of engines rumbled in the distance, like an omnipresent storm waiting to take flight. Amid this controlled madness, a figure stood still, quiet, unassuming, and easily overlooked. Jaden Carter, no more than 17, waited patiently near baggage drop, holding a sleek carry-on with one hand and a small envelope in the other. Dressed in a simple black hoodie, jeans, and pristine sneakers, nothing about him screamed extraordinary. And that was precisely the point. Brad, a bulky baggage handler in his late 40s, with a jaw perpetually set in disapproval, watched the boy approach. His cap sat low over his forehead, casting a shadow over narrow eyes that seemed to squint in suspicion more often than in sunlight. "Hey kid," he barked, jerking his thumb toward the side of the counter. "You're in the wrong lane. This drop is for first class and VIP priority." Jaden's voice was quiet but firm. "I know. I'm flying priority." Brad gave a scoffing laugh. "Yeah, and I'm flying a plane." He didn't check the tag or ticket. Instead, he grabbed Jaden's polished black suitcase and, with a dramatic grunt, tossed it onto the conveyor belt like it was a piece of unwanted trash. The suitcase thudded hard, hard enough that another handler nearby, a younger man named Kenny, winced at the sound. "Yo," Kenny said, eyebrows raised. "That thing looked expensive. You sure you want to toss it like that?" Brad snorted. "It's probably a fake. These kids all think they're rappers now. Flashy luggage don't mean a thing." Jaden stood still, eyes on the suitcase, now disappearing behind the rubber flaps. His face remained calm, almost too calm. He said nothing, just nodded once, slowly, and walked away. Kenny glanced at Brad. "You ever think maybe you shouldn't judge people like that?" Brad's answer was a scoff and a muttered, "He's lucky I didn't toss him with it." As Jaden walked toward the VIP check-in lounge, the camera by the escalator caught his image, a young black teen blending in with the crowd, unnoticed, but watching. His phone buzzed. A message lit up on the screen. Contract signed. Ownership changes effective midnight. His thumb hovered over the screen. Then he tapped once and replied, "Let them play their part. We'll record everything." Back at the baggage area, Brad resumed tossing bags. "They come in with their attitude and gold chains," he muttered, "and think they own the place." Kenny didn't reply this time. Something about Jaden's quiet confidence unsettled him. But Brad was already onto the next bag, barking orders at a new trainee. His voice full of the kind of contempt that grows slowly over years, like rust on iron, corrosive and irreversible. "Fast track? That's what they call it now. Back in my day, you earned your place." Inside the terminal, Jaden passed by a row of framed posters. One caught his eye, Legacy Airlines, owned by the people for the people. He stared at it for a beat longer than necessary. Then he smiled. Barely. The irony wasn't lost on him. Near gate 27, a white couple watched him from the VIP line. The woman clutched her purse tighter. The man whispered something under his breath. Jaden ignored them. Instead, he walked over to the lounge doors, presented his pass, and entered without a word. Inside, luxury greeted him like an old friend. Leather seats, soft lighting, the faint scent of eucalyptus and roasted espresso. A staff member glanced at his pass, did a double take, then forced a customer service smile. "Welcome, Mr. Carter." "Thank you," he replied, tone as calm as ever. As he took a seat in the far corner, out of direct view, but with a perfect line of sight to the entrance, Jaden pulled out his laptop and opened a file. Asset Transfer Legacy Airlines Final Acquisition Agreement. The total acquisition amount flashed across the screen, $120 million. The camera in his laptop lid flickered to life. Live recording initiated. This wasn't just a trip. It was documentation, evidence. Meanwhile, in the staff room, Brad was retelling the moment like a war story. Told the kid to beat it. Threw his fake Lewis bag like a pro pitcher. Bet that rattled his little dreams. Everyone laughed, except Kenny. "You really think that was smart?" he asked. Brad shrugged. He'll remember that moment the rest of his life. And he would, just not for the reason Brad expected. That evening, on the tarmac, a shift manager received a memo. Prepare security detail for VIP Carter. Owner in transit. Do not disclose status until authorized. The manager frowned, rereading it. Owner? He whispered, confused. But by then, the plane was already preparing for takeoff, and Jaden sat quietly in seat 1A, sipping water, laptop in front of him, playing back the footage of Brad tossing the suitcase. He leaned back, eyes closed, waiting. Jaden Carter glanced at the digital board overhead, eyes narrowing as the blinking orange text flashed. Final boarding. Flight 972 Gate A19. He had exactly 12 minutes to reach the gate, but something didn't add up. He'd arrived more than early, past the security checkpoint with no issue, and yet his boarding documents, already cleared through VIP, had been inexplicably flagged for re-verification. At the desk just outside the premium passenger check-in, Brad stood again, this time wearing a smug grin that barely masked his contempt. "Seems like we got a little hiccup, superstar," he muttered, flipping Jaden's documents in his hand like he was performing a card trick. Jaden said nothing, but the steel in his stare cut through the handlers, showboating with unsettling precision. "Systems being weird," Brad added, looking up just long enough to meet Jaden's gaze. "Guess we've got to do this manually." Then, slowly, intentionally, he began to re-enter Jaden's info, one key at a time. Behind Jaden, the line grew. A couple cleared their throats in frustration. A businesswoman glanced repeatedly at her Rolex, and an older gentleman muttered something about kids these days thinking they run the world. Brad's deliberate pace only emphasized his quiet power in that moment. "Oops, fat-fingered that," he said with mock regret, hitting the backspace key louder than necessary. "Gotta start again." Jaden didn't move, didn't blink. He simply waited, letting Brad finish the performance. His carry-on still hadn't surfaced. When he asked calmly, Brad simply shrugged and replied, "Probably still rolling around somewhere back there," as though that were perfectly normal for priority-tagged luggage. By the time the boarding pass reprinted and the security gate finally cleared him, Jaden had 4 minutes to spare. His calculated calm never faltered, but the delay had been noticed. Kenny, now stationed at the secondary luggage intake, whispered into his headset. Passenger Carter delayed at check-in by Brad again. Deliberate. No one responded, but Jaden's name was already circulating quietly in internal channels, though Brad had no idea. As Jaden walked briskly toward the first-class boarding lane, he passed dozens of travelers who would never know they'd just brushed past the future owner of the airline they were flying on. It didn't matter. None of it mattered right now. Only the next part of the plan did. He arrived at the final gate just as the VIP boarding group was being called. A smiling male agent scanned his pass, paused only a moment when his tablet pinged with an alert, and then waved him through with a courteous nod. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter." Jaden returned the nod, offered a polite thank you, and walked toward the jet bridge. The chaos that awaited him began precisely 12 feet later. A figure in a navy blue blazer with gold-trimmed epaulets stepped into his path. Flight attendant Miranda Fields, mid-30s, sharp bun, sharper tone, and the kind of judgmental gaze that could slice through titanium, held her hand up as if stopping traffic. "Excuse me, sir," she said, looking down, not at Jaden's face, but at his hoodie, his sneakers, his youth. "I think you're in the wrong line." Economy is boarding after this group. Jaden, still holding his boarding pass, looked her directly in the eyes and offered it wordlessly. Miranda took it with hesitation, glancing at the name, then the class designation, then back to Jaden. Her brow furrowed. "First class," she said, not quite hiding the surprise in her voice. "Yes," Jaden replied calmly, without flinching. "This is the right gate. This is the right line. And this is the right seat." Miranda hesitated longer than necessary, eyes flicking toward another uniformed crew member standing a few steps behind. That crew member, sensing Miranda's uncertainty, approached but didn't intervene. "Do you mind stepping aside while I double-check something?" Miranda asked, her voice polite on the surface, but underscored by that unmistakable sharpness. The same tone teachers once used to question a student's homework authenticity. The same tone security guards used when asking why someone was hanging around in an upscale store. Jaden didn't move. He simply said, "I'd rather not. We're boarding now, and I have priority clearance." That sentence, said without a hint of arrogance, landed like a challenge. Miranda wasn't prepared for it. A few nearby passengers began to notice the standoff. A man in a suit adjusted his glasses. A woman holding a designer handbag whispered something to her companion. Miranda stiffened. "I'll need to verify this with my lead," she insisted. She turned, speaking quietly into her headset, then looked back. "Until then, I'll have to ask you to wait to the side." Jaden sighed softly, not in frustration, but as if he'd just confirmed something inevitable. He stepped aside, pulling out his phone as he did. The screen lit up, a live feed of the gate camera. Audio was on. He hit record. 5 minutes later, a higher-ranking crew member arrived. She scanned the boarding pass, checked the manifest, and said in a perfectly neutral tone, "He's cleared. He's on the list. Apologies for the confusion." Miranda's lips tightened into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course," she said sweetly. "Must have been a system lag." Jaden didn't reply. He simply walked past her and onto the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, the contrast between the tension at the gate and the luxury of the cabin was stark. The first-class section gleamed with soft leather seats, ambient lighting, and gold-accented fixtures. Jaden placed his carry-on above seat 1A, exactly where he was supposed to be, and settled in with silent precision. As he buckled his seatbelt, a mother across the aisle leaned toward her child and whispered, "I think he's in the wrong seat." The child asked, "Why?" The mother didn't answer. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our final boarding shortly. Please prepare for takeoff." The voice was smooth, detached, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded beneath its announcement. Jaden looked out the window. The tarmac shimmered in the afternoon light, and his reflection in the glass stared back, not with pride, not with anger, but with quiet resolution. They still didn't know. They thought he was just another kid, pretending to be something he wasn't. But that was exactly the way he'd planned it. He reached into his hoodie pocket, pulled out the envelope again, the one Brad had never thought to ask about, and slid it back into the inside compartment of his carry-on. Somewhere behind him, a passenger muttered, "Probably got a rich uncle," and laughed. Jaden leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, and waited. The next twist was coming. The aircraft began to hum with pre-flight activity as crew members secured last-minute preparations, passengers buckled in, and the cabin doors sealed shut with an audible thud that seemed to echo deeper for Jaden Carter than anyone else. He sat still in seat 1A, perfectly composed, eyes fixed on the screen in front of him, though it remained blank. His thoughts, however, weren't idle. Every insult, every delay, every glance layered with doubt had been carefully recorded, logged not just on his phone, but etched into his memory with surgical precision. A stewardess passed by and offered him a bottle of water, which he accepted politely. She didn't seem to recognize the earlier conflict from the gate. She simply moved with the mechanical efficiency of someone trained to smile without thinking. Jaden didn't hold it against her. He knew the storm wasn't here. Not yet. Below the aircraft, in the labyrinthine network of luggage transport belts, something else was brewing. Brad stood in the cargo bay near the baggage scanner, clipboard in hand, pretending to review tags as he leaned against a crate. The metal conveyor belt rattled with the rhythm of arriving luggage. And then it happened. A sleek, hard-shell black carry-on emerged, its surface gleaming with a priority tag attached to the handle. Jaden's bag. Brad's eyes narrowed with recognition, and he waved at Kenny without turning his head. "Hold that one," he said sharply. Kenny blinked. "It's tagged for priority loading," he reminded. Brad scoffed. "Yeah, and I'm tagged for a six-figure bonus. Doesn't mean I'm getting one." He reached for the bag and slid it onto a side table. "You're really doing this?" Kenny asked, not quite whispering, but low enough to avoid the cameras. Brad didn't answer. Instead, he pulled on a pair of gloves and used a utility key to disengage the bag's TSA lock with practiced ease. The suitcase popped open with a clean click, and as the lid lifted, both men froze, not because of anything illegal, but because of what it all meant. Nestled inside were 3 leather-bound folders embossed with gold initials. CA Holdings, a top-tier investment firm. Beneath them, a slim MacBook Pro glowed softly in sleep mode, its screen displaying a minimized document. Final acquisition timeline confidential. There were also neatly stacked financial ledgers, international stock certificates, and printed communications between high-level investors. Brad stared for a second too long. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, rifling through the documents with a level of care that betrayed his confusion. "Who does this kid think he is, carrying this kind of stuff?" Kenny leaned in slightly, instantly recognizing a familiar logo. This is real," he whispered. "This is some Wall Street-level stuff. Carter, wait, isn't that the name on the manifest?" Brad shook his head like he could physically reject the implications. "Nah, no way. This has to be planted, probably stolen." And that's when he said it. "Figures," Brad muttered with a venomous chuckle, voice tinged with cynicism. "These kids are real good at taking stuff that isn't theirs." His tone was loud enough to draw a glance from another handler 2 rows down, who paused, frowned, then went back to tagging bags. Kenny stiffened, the blood draining from his face. "Brad, you can't say that." Brad shrugged. "Just calling it like I see it." Back on the plane, Jaden's phone vibrated subtly in his pocket. He checked the screen under the tray table, a secure alert from his tracking device embedded inside the suitcase. The bag had been opened. Duration, 3 minutes. Contents, disturbed. Video, recording. Jaden's expression didn't change. He closed the message and looked out the window as if all was calm. His fingers remained still, but a small notification was already auto-forwarding the surveillance clip to his legal team. In the cargo hold, Brad zipped the bag shut and tossed it back onto the conveyor belt with a dismissive grunt, wiping his hands like he'd just finished cleaning something filthy. "Let's get it loaded before Mr. Hedge Fund cries to management," he said, voice thick with sarcasm. But the damage was done. He had seen just enough to question who this boy really was, and the not knowing only made him angrier. "Next time," Brad muttered as he walked away, "he better be carrying gym clothes instead of financial contracts." Minutes later, a supervisor arrived at the loading dock, responding to a flagged report from the central system. "One of the luggage locks just triggered a recording alert," she said, checking the manifest. "Passenger ID matches a VIP clearance." Her eyes darted from the screen to the faces around her. "Who had hands on this bag?" Kenny didn't answer, but Brad, already out of sight, had left fingerprints far deeper than he realized. Up in the cabin, turbulence rocked the plane gently as they passed through a low-pressure zone. Jaden didn't flinch. His eyes scanned the cabin discreetly, taking note of who looked comfortable, who looked curious, and who looked annoyed by his presence. The couple across from him were still whispering. A man 2 rows back was filming something on his phone, trying to look casual. Jaden ignored them all. His focus returned to the laptop in front of him, now opened, the screen displaying a checklist titled, "Behavioral Audit Phase 1 Complete." A stewardess passed again, offering a light snack. "Would you like something to eat, Mr. Carter?" she asked this time, using his name. "Just water," Jaden replied. "Thank you." Down below, Kenny finally mustered the courage to speak. He approached the supervisor discreetly. "You need to watch camera 4, he said quietly. Brad opened that bag. He didn't have clearance. The supervisor narrowed her eyes, then turned to her tablet. Send me the timestamp. As the plane leveled out, Jaden received another ping on his phone. Report logged. Verbal remark recorded. Internal review pending. He looked down at the message, then reached for his notebook, flipping to a clean page. In careful, elegant script, he wrote, "Insult number 3, open racial slur. Handler Brad. Witness, Kenny. Audio and visual confirmed." He tapped the pen once against the edge of the tray, then tucked it away. The calm remained, but just beneath the surface, something sharper stirred. The point wasn't revenge. It was exposure. Not just of Brad, but of a culture, a system, a sickness so familiar, most people stopped noticing it. Jaden noticed, and he wasn't done noticing. Not yet. The ambient chime of the cabin lights switching to pre-takeoff dim was followed by a hushed silence, the kind of quiet filled not with peace, but with the friction of unspoken tension. Jaden sat still in seat 1A, posture upright but relaxed, eyes once again returning to the window, though his mind remained tuned to the energy within the aircraft. Every cough, every whispered breath, every glance tossed his way carried weight. Something had shifted since the incident at the gate and the suspicious check of his luggage. Word had traveled faster than announcements over the intercom. Whispers now floated through the first-class cabin like smoke from a fire no one wanted to admit they started. Across the aisle, a woman with platinum hair leaned toward her husband and muttered under her breath, "That's the one." The one who held everyone up at the gate. Her husband didn't bother to lower his voice when he added, "He's probably flying on some youth charity ticket." 2 rows back, a man in a 3-piece suit was holding his phone vertically, subtly recording Jaden while pretending to film the seat's entertainment monitor. The man smiled to himself as he whispered to his screen, "This is what happens when people get in where they don't belong." Jaden heard them all, though none of the remarks were directed at him outright. They didn't need to be. He had learned long ago that racism often arrived wrapped in plausible deniability, a chuckle, a glance, a phone raised at the perfect angle. His phone vibrated again, this time alerting him that his onboard facial scan had been uploaded to a trending social post tagged #GateDrama. He tapped once and saw himself in freeze frame, captured from across the terminal, standing still, holding his pass, facing down Miranda. The caption read, "Entitled Gen Z thinks hoodie equals first class." The comment section had already begun to populate, probably forged a pass. Parents must be influencers. Affirmative action in the sky. Jaden locked the phone, eyes still forward. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. But internally, another line was added to his list. Insult number for viral defamation attempt. Captured image. Source unknown. Timestamps logged. He closed the app and let the weight of silence fall over him again. A silence pierced moments later by the high-pitched, curious voice of a child. The boy next to him, maybe 7 or 8, sat wide-eyed with a coloring book in his lap and a juice box cradled in the crook of his elbow. His voice came soft, but unfiltered. "Are you in trouble?" Jaden turned to look at him, meeting a face filled not with judgment, but genuine curiosity, the raw, untainted kind that hadn't yet learned to discriminate. "No," Jaden replied gently. "Why do you ask?" The boy shrugged. "People are looking at you funny. Some of them are whispering." He paused, then added, "A lady behind us said you weren't supposed to be here." Jaden offered a half-smile. Sometimes people say things because they don't understand what they're seeing. The boy nodded slowly, digesting that. Then he leaned in a little closer, as if sharing a secret. "Are you scared they'll kick you off the plane?" The question was innocent, almost casual, but it hit Jaden like a punch to the gut, not because it was offensive, but because it was real, because it acknowledged something no one else had dared say aloud. He looked at the boy for a moment, considering his response. "No," he said finally. "I'm not scared." The boy's brow furrowed, but not in confusion. It was admiration. "Okay," he said softly. "You're really calm." Jaden nodded. "I've had a lot of practice." The boy turned back to his coloring book, and Jaden returned to his thoughts, but the cabin was no longer just noise. It was a theater of subtle attacks. 2 rows back, someone had posted a new clip to social media, capturing Jaden from behind with a text overlay. VIP or VIP wannabe? Laughter filtered through thinly veiled coughs. A woman in the row behind him cleared her throat with theatrical exaggeration, saying to no one in particular, "Security really needs to screen better these days. You never know who you're sitting next to." Her seatmate chuckled in agreement, eyes flicking to Jaden with a smirk. One of the flight attendants, passing through with drink service, glanced at the screen of a passenger watching the viral clip mid-upload. She hesitated for a second, then continued down the aisle without a word. Jaden made a note of her badge number. No intervention, no objection, just silence, complicity. He turned his attention to his tablet, pulled up the airline's internal investment forecast, data he had secured weeks ago during negotiations. The numbers were clean, strong, profitable, and in 48 hours they would belong to him. But for now he was still the kid in the hoodie. He reached for a pen and discreetly scribbled another entry in his notebook. Insult number 5, public ridicule by passengers. Recording without consent. Viral circulation. Minor present. His handwriting was steady, unbothered. He had learned to compartmentalize, learned to gather every insult not as a wound, but as a receipt. He wouldn't respond here. That wasn't the mission. The mission was clarity, record, response, at the right time, in the right way. The child beside him peeked over again, tilting his head toward the notebook. "What are you writing?" he asked, eyes curious. Jaden smiled gently. "Just some notes," he replied, "for a story I'm working on." The boy nodded like he understood something bigger than he could put into words, then said quietly, "I hope it has a good ending." Jaden looked at him, truly looked, and answered, "So do I." In the background, the whispers didn't stop. A woman had begun messaging her group chat with pictures of the boy in 1A. Someone had tagged the airline's official account with a complaint questioning standards. The man with the phone was now zooming in. The comments were multiplying. The accusations were shifting tones, from subtle condescension to outright suggestion. How did he afford first class? Is the crew not saying anything because they're scared of being labeled racist? Next thing you know, he'll say he owns the place. Jaden didn't answer any of them. He didn't need to. He had already decided they would answer for themselves in time. While Jaden remained composed inside the cabin, surrounded by murmurs and digital judgments, something far less composed was unfolding beneath him. On the tarmac, in the dim concrete bowels of the airport, where baggage handlers moved under buzzing fluorescent lights and the roar of jet engines. The final loading for Flight 972 had begun, and every bag was being scanned, weighed, and sent up through the belly of the aircraft. But Brad wasn't finished. He had been stewing ever since opening Jaden's luggage and catching a glimpse of documents he didn't understand and status he didn't believe. The kind of status that made him feel smaller without a word ever spoken. As he watched the luggage roll forward, a thought had formed in his mind, not fully shaped, but enough to stir spite into action. "Let's see how important he feels when this is over," he muttered to himself. Jaden's carry-on rolled into view again, routed for manual load due to its contents. Brad stepped toward the belt, waved off another handler who reached for it, and said, "Got it." He didn't lift it carefully like he would for a diplomat or an executive. No, he grabbed it with one hand, yanked it upward, tilted it just enough to unbalance his grip, and then, oops, let it fall. Not on the soft mat, not on a rubber buffer, but squarely onto the steel edge of the conveyor junction, where it hit with a heavy, unmistakable crunch. A sound that turned heads, a sound that suggested damage no sticker could excuse. Brad didn't flinch. In fact, he laughed. "My bad," he said sarcastically, crouching down beside the crack case. The zipper had popped from the pressure, and the side hinge now bent outward like a crushed soda can. Papers fluttered out slowly, lifted by the crosswind from a passing jet. A white folder tumbled open, revealing several pages stamped confidential. A golden pen rolled free, catching the light. Kenny, walking by with a new stack of boarding tags, froze. "Brad, what the hell?" Brad ignored him. He reached into his vest pocket, pulled out his phone, and hit record. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in mock commentary, This is what happens when you fake your way into first class. Gravity always brings you back down. He zoomed in on the broken suitcase, the exposed documents, and the scattered tech. Let's see him talk his way out of this one. Kenny stepped closer, lowering his voice. You can't film that. That's evidence of property damage. What are you doing? Brad kept grinning. Just documenting my shift. Bro, don't you want to see justice served? Kenny shook his head. You don't know who he is. Brad laughed louder. Exactly. And I don't care. He turned the phone back on himself and whispered dramatically into the lens. Sometimes they gotta be reminded who runs the ground game. And today, I'm the lesson. Behind him, another handler muttered, You're gonna regret that, before walking off. Brad gathered a few of the scattered papers and stuffed them back into the busted case. One page, half torn from its binder, read, Acquisition Schedule Phase 3, Media Response Strategy. He didn't see it, didn't care. Instead, he used a roll of tape to temporarily seal the suitcase shut, slapping on a fragile sticker as if it were some inside joke. Then he gave the camera one last nod and ended the video with a flourish. Lesson delivered. Bag secured. Karma in motion. He uploaded it to his private group chat titled Belt Brothers, captioned, Taught the punk a lesson. Hope he enjoys his flight. Up above, Jaden's phone vibrated. Not once, but 3 times. The first alert came from his suitcase's internal sensor. A hard impact had been detected, beyond acceptable threshold. The second alert, internal camera triggered. The third, compartment breach. Footage uploading. Jaden reached into his hoodie and pulled out a small device no larger than a key fob. One tap, and a stream of real-time footage opened on his tablet. He watched the moment the bag hit steel, the laughter, the phone recording. He saw the documents flutter. He saw Brad's face in full HD, smirking like he'd just won a war. Jaden said nothing. He simply leaned back, adjusted the brightness on the screen, and let the feed continue. Next to him, the boy with the coloring book was still working on a picture of a dragon. That looks cool, Jaden said softly. The boy smiled, oblivious to the storm just 50 feet beneath them. Brad, now on break, sat in the staff lounge, scrolling through his messages. Reactions to his video came fast. Laughing emojis. A savage gif. One guy replied, You're gonna get promoted for this. Another, Don't let HR see that though, LOL. But then something odd happened. The video began to circulate outside the group. Someone reposted it anonymously to a public page with a caption that read, Baggage handler abuses passenger property. Real professional service here. Within 10 minutes, it had 300 views. Then 600. Then 2,000. Brad hadn't even noticed yet. He was too busy high-fiving another handler and reenacting the bag drop with a broom. In the cabin, Jaden received a 4th alert. Video footage copied to Legal Cloud. User face identified. Bradley Kent. Employment status active. Employer alert prepared. Jaden didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply closed the feed, tapped his pen to the notebook again, and wrote, Insult number 6, intentional destruction of personal property. Malicious recording. Identity confirmed. He looked up just as the flight attendant announced, Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be taxiing shortly. Please ensure all belongings are stowed and your seatbelt is fastened. Jaden reached for his seatbelt and clicked it into place with precision. Then, almost absent-mindedly, he whispered under his breath, They think this is the lesson. A new ping sounded. His legal assistant, monitoring from another city, messaged, Received. Chain of custody established. Timestamp 100% matched. Proceed. Jaden replied with one word, Wait. At that same moment, 2 rows back, the man who had earlier recorded him leaned over to a colleague and whispered, Did you see the latest video? Some guy smashed that kid's bag on purpose. Looked kinda personal. The colleague shrugged. He probably deserved it. Entitled kids with money never learn until they lose something. Jaden didn't turn around. He just looked at his reflection in the window. The city lights far below flickering like distant stars, each one holding a different truth no one had seen coming. As the aircraft steadied in altitude, the cabin lights softened into a muted glow, casting a warm, but artificial ambience across the first-class section. Jaden sat with his tray table folded away, his hands resting on his lap, his thoughts still tethered to the video footage from moments ago. Brad's malicious grin, the calculated drop, the humiliation dressed as clumsy accident. The internal alert from his legal dashboard had now flagged the incident as high priority, and yet, his face showed nothing. No anger, no frustration, just stillness. That stillness was about to be tested again. The curtain at the front of the cabin swished aside, and through it stepped the lead flight attendant, Claudia Marks, a woman whose posture spoke of decades in service, but whose gaze held an edge sharper than any polished protocol. She was mid-50s, efficient, and immaculately put together, with a name tag that shimmered under the reading lights and eyes that scanned each passenger like a customs checkpoint. Jaden had noticed her earlier, walking the aisles with practiced grace, but this time she wasn't offering drinks or blankets. This time, she came with something heavier. Stopping at seat 1A, she placed one palm delicately on the headrest beside Jaden and leaned in just enough to drop her voice to what she must have thought was polite discretion. "Mr. Carter," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I'm afraid we've encountered a seating discrepancy." Jaden turned slightly toward her, calm as ever. "Discrepancy," he echoed. "My boarding pass is valid. I confirmed with the gate agent." Claudia's smile twitched. "Yes, I see that, and I understand that your pass says 1A, but we've had a situation. One of our valued loyalty members, Platinum Diamond Tier, is on board, and there was an error in the seat assignment." Jaden didn't respond immediately. He glanced at the seat next to him. Empty. Then back to Claudia. "So what are you asking me to do?" She folded her hands neatly in front of her. "We'd like to request that you relocate to another seat. In economy. Temporarily. It's the only way we can accommodate the oversight without delaying service." Her tone was soft, almost apologetic, but the tightness in her jaw betrayed the truth. This wasn't a request. It was a decision already made. Jaden raised an eyebrow. "Temporarily?" he asked. "And where exactly is the seat?" Claudia hesitated just for a moment. "Rear cabin," she said finally. "Seat 34F. Her voice dipped slightly. "It's next to the lavatory, but we'll provide you with a complimentary beverage for the inconvenience." Jaden blinked once. Then again. A long silence stretched between them as passengers nearby began to turn their heads, their curiosity barely veiled. "Why me?" he asked at last, not accusingly, but clearly. Claudia gave a carefully neutral answer. "We assessed the situation and felt it was best resolved this way. It's just seating. We hope you understand." Behind her, a woman 2 rows back smirked and whispered, "Maybe now he'll stop pretending." Her companion chuckled quietly. That seat was too big for him anyway. Jaden looked around the cabin, at the stares, the smiles, the downturned glances, and then slowly stood up. "I see," he said. Claudia gave a small nod, clearly relieved. "A flight attendant will escort you to your new seat shortly," she added, as if she were offering a gift. Jaden didn't argue. He didn't protest. Instead, he reached up, opened the overhead bin, and removed his carry-on, now dented and patched with tape thanks to Brad, and held it carefully. The internal camera inside recorded every face that turned to watch, every eye that shifted between satisfaction and awkwardness, every phone that subtly began filming, just in case this scene turned dramatic. But Jaden didn't give them drama. He gave them discipline. A junior crew member appeared moments later, a soft-spoken woman named Elise, who looked genuinely uncomfortable as she said, "Right this way, sir." He followed her without hesitation. As they passed down the aisle, someone whispered, "Told you he didn't belong here." Another added, "They're making room for someone important now." Jaden heard it all. He logged every word in his mind like lines in a courtroom transcript. When they reached the back of the plane, Elise gestured to 34F, a cramped, rigid seat pressed against the wall, beside the lavatory. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and recirculated breath. The lighting back here wasn't warm, it was fluorescent and pale. No complimentary mints. No champagne trays. No respect. Jaden stowed his bag, sat down and buckled in. Elise looked at him for a long moment and said quietly, "I'm sorry. This wasn't right." Jaden met her gaze. "You don't have to apologize," he said gently. "You didn't make the decision." She nodded once and walked away. Across the aisle, a teenage boy filmed him with a smirk, adding a whisper to his camera. "When you lie about being rich and get sent to toilet row." The boy's friend snorted. "That's what happens when you front too hard." They laughed. Jaden didn't react. He sat still, pulled out his notebook, and calmly wrote, "Insult number 7, forced relocation. First class to rear lavatory seat. Decision led by Claudia Marks. Video evidence collected. Multiple verbal witnesses. The flight shuddered as turbulence passed through. The lights flickered briefly before returning to normal. Behind him, the lavatory door opened and closed again and again as passengers shuffled through, some brushing his arm as they moved. No one said "excuse me." No one looked him in the eye. It was as if he had become invisible. An inconvenience. A correction. But Jaden knew what this was. This wasn't just seating. This was an erasure attempt, a quiet exile disguised as logistics. And every moment of it was now part of the record. In the cabin ahead, Claudia made her way toward the premium section, where the newly seated Platinum Diamond guest reclined comfortably in 1A. "Apologies for the mix-up," she said warmly, handing the man a fresh drink. "We've taken care of it." The man raised his glass. "Glad someone still understands the value of loyalty," he said with a wink. Claudia laughed politely and moved on. Far behind, pressed into the narrowest seat on the plane, Jaden opened his tablet again. The map of the flight route hovered above a second screen, which now displayed a message from his executive assistant. "Media prepared. Legal files encrypted. Final stage triggered on confirmation." He tapped once. Not yet. His gaze drifted to the window beside him, where nothing but darkness stared back. But in the reflection of the plastic pane, he saw his own eyes, focused, steady, and absolutely certain of what would come next. The soft drone of the engines hummed beneath Jaden's seat in row 34F, muffled only by the occasional flush from the lavatory behind him, and the crinkle of pretzel wrappers passed down the aisle. He sat there with a stillness that no longer disguised tension. It radiated focus. The voices of nearby passengers who had mocked him earlier had faded into background static. His tablet rested on his lap, its screen dimmed but still live, quietly running multiple encrypted feeds. One window displayed the cabin camera facing seat 1A, now occupied by a middle-aged man in a business suit, leaning back with the satisfied air of someone who believed the world was exactly as it should be. Another window showed the internal messaging server of Legacy Airlines. A third showed a secure live call log, currently idle. Until now, the screen lit up in green. A message blinked. "Emergency priority call connected tower control to Captain Marsh authorization level. Executive override." Somewhere ahead in the sealed cockpit, the pilot, Captain Jordan Marsh, a veteran with 20 years of transatlantic service, stiffened as his headset crackled to life with a voice he hadn't expected to hear mid-flight. "Captain Marsh," the voice said calmly, but with unmistakable weight, "this is David Lynn, Executive Vice President of Operations. You are carrying a high-level acquisition principal on board, traveling incognito for internal security reasons. That passenger is seated in 34F. His name is Jaden Carter. Effective immediately, per Directive 88.01. He is to be granted full executive access. Please initiate cabin relocation and inform crew to stand by. Do not alert other passengers." Marsh blinked twice, the name snapping like a switch in his memory. Jaden Carter. The name wasn't just familiar. It was printed on the acquisition bulletin he'd read earlier that morning. The teen CEO rumored to have just acquired a controlling stake in Legacy Airlines under a confidential holding firm. Marsh had scoffed at the headline at the time, assuming it was exaggerated clickbait. But now that voice, that directive, left no room for doubt. "Confirmed," Marsh said into the mic, his voice steady but his pulse rising. "I'll have him moved immediately." The cockpit went silent again, but Marsh was already reaching for the intercom switch, toggling a private channel to lead flight attendant Claudia. "Claudia," he said quietly, "I need you at the cockpit door. Now." Moments later, Claudia stood stiffly at the front, expecting a routine update. Marsh didn't waste time. "Do you know who's sitting in 34F? Claudia's brows pinched. "A young man who had a seat mix-up. We reassigned him to resolve an issue with one of our Diamond members." Marsh leaned forward. "That young man is Jaden Carter. As in, the Jaden Carter who now owns this airline." Claudia's eyes widened, the words failing to register at first. "That's impossible," she said automatically. Marsh slid the flight manifest across the console, pointing to the confidential marker tagged to the seat. "Executive ID verified asset principal do not disturb." He added, "You missed the memo." "We all did. But this isn't just some VIP. He's the owner, and HQ just made it very clear. He's to be treated as such." Immediately, Claudia turned pale. Down in row 34, Jaden received the internal signal he'd been waiting for. On his screen, the cockpit door camera showed Claudia's expression shifting from disbelief to dread. Jaden tapped a quick message to his assistant, and seconds later, a figure appeared at the front of the cabin. A tall, sharply dressed woman in her late 20s, wearing a discreet comms earpiece and carrying a leather portfolio. She walked with confident, measured steps through the first-class section and down the aisle until she reached 34F. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice smooth but audible enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "Your executive cabin is ready. Please follow me." A ripple moved through the seats like a silent wave of electricity. Whispers surged instantly. The teenage boy across the aisle dropped his phone in surprise. The man in the suit in 1A sat forward, eyes narrowed. Jaden stood slowly, tucking his tablet under his arm, and nodded. "Thank you, Ava." The woman, Ava Blake, his personal legal and operational assistant, gave a brief nod and turned to lead him forward. Jaden didn't rush. He moved through the cabin with the same calm he'd held from the start, except now, every step felt like a seismic shift in atmosphere. As he passed Claudia, she opened her mouth slightly as if to speak, but no words came. "Is there a problem?" Jaden asked evenly, stopping just before the curtain. Claudia hesitated. "Mr. Carter, I wasn't informed." "I didn't." Jaden tilted his head slightly. "You didn't know who I was." "Understood." He stepped forward and walked past her without another word, Ava following behind him. The curtain parted. He entered first class once more, this time not as a ghost, not as an inconvenience, but as its true master. The man in 1A stood up abruptly, clearly unsure whether to offer the seat or demand justification. But Ava approached him first. "You're seated in error," she said, with the crispness of a courtroom command. "This cabin belongs to Mr. Carter. Please return to your assigned seat." The man sputtered, "I'm a Diamond Tier member." Jaden cut in gently. "And I'm the reason your benefits exist." The man blinked. Claudia approached from behind, attempting to smooth the situation. "Sir," she said quickly, "please cooperate. We'll provide you with a complimentary voucher." The man, flustered, gathered his things and stormed off. Jaden reclaimed 1A, set down his carry-on, and reclined into the seat with a slow, deliberate breath. Ava handed him a folder. Inside was a stack of prepared NDAs, HR reports, and internal response templates. Jaden opened to the first page. Claudia stood just to the side, unsure whether to flee or faint. From the cockpit, Captain Marsh watched on the monitor, then toggled the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with calm professionalism, "we're honored to have on board a special member of the Legacy family today. We appreciate your cooperation in making sure all our guests receive the service they deserve." Jaden looked around. The cabin was silent now. No more whispers. No more sideways glances. Just faces, confused, embarrassed, aware. And they hadn't seen anything yet. The cabin silence following Jaden's return to seat 1A was thick and loaded, as if the air itself had shifted from oxygen to electricity. No one dared to speak above a whisper, yet the entire first-class section vibrated with suppressed questions. Claudia stood rigid near the galley, her hands clasped behind her back, so tightly her knuckles paled beneath the pressure. Ava sat across the aisle in an auxiliary crew jump seat, tablet in hand, quietly reviewing the internal comms. On the screen, the airline's executive dashboard had just updated. Majority acquisition. Carter Holdings 80% stake confirmed. Effective immediately. In the cockpit, Captain Marsh had just wrapped a second brief conversation with HQ's legal liaison when his secondary line buzzed again. He recognized the caller ID instantly. Arthur Denton, the long-standing CEO of Legacy Airlines. The man who rarely made direct calls mid-flight, unless something was burning. Marsh picked up immediately. "Captain Marsh," he answered. Arthur's voice came through clear, commanding, and impossibly calm. "Jordan, we've just finalized the transaction. As of this moment, Legacy Airlines is now majority owned by Carter Holdings." Marsh nodded, though no one could see. "Understood, sir." "More importantly," Arthur continued, "the principal of that firm, Jaden Carter, is on your flight in Seat 1A. I trust you've been briefed." Marsh glanced at the monitor feed where Jaden sat reading a document in total composure. "We have, and he's been reseated accordingly." Arthur exhaled through the line. "Good. Then I need you to do one more thing. I want you to announce it, not just to the passengers, to the entire crew. Today marks a new era for us. We're going to lead it with transparency. Let them hear it from me." Marsh hesitated, then replied, "You want me to patch you through?" "Now," Arthur said firmly. Marsh toggled the comms, linked the CEO directly into the aircraft-wide speaker system, and flipped the external feed to the operations center where terminal staff, baggage crew, and control tower teams were all monitoring the flight in parallel. A chime echoed through the aircraft, an unusual triple tone never heard before by most of the staff. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur's voice began, its presence startling passengers and crew alike. "This is Arthur Denton, CEO of Legacy Airlines, and I'm addressing not just the guests aboard Flight 972, but every member of the crew and support teams monitoring this broadcast." Jaden glanced up from his reading, his eyes narrowing as he listened. "Effective this afternoon," Arthur continued, "Legacy Airlines has entered a new chapter. After months of strategic discussions and private negotiations, a controlling interest, 80% of our company's shares, has been purchased by Carter Holdings." A gasp rang out from somewhere mid-cabin. Claudia's breath caught, her throat locking. Behind her, a junior attendant dropped a tray with a clatter. In the staff room of the airport terminal, a half-dozen employees froze mid-sentence, their eyes locked on the monitor. Arthur didn't pause. The principal owner of Carter Holdings and the majority stakeholder of Legacy Airlines is none other than Mr. Jaden Carter, who, as many of you know, is currently seated on board this flight. Murmurs spread like fire through the aircraft. The man in the suit who had stolen Jaden's seat turned sheet white. Claudia's face drained of color. Ava, still calm, tapped on her tablet, logging reactions in real time. Arthur's voice sharpened. "To those who offered him disrespect, judgment, or neglect, consider this your first and final reminder that power rarely looks the way you expect." Mr. Carter didn't arrive with an entourage or fanfare. He boarded humbly, watched carefully, and recorded everything. And today, he owns the very airline that dismissed him. Back in the cargo bay, Brad's phone buzzed as he leaned against a crate. He opened the push notification from the company network, reading it slowly. New owner profile, Jaden Carter, CEO, Carter Holdings. Brad's grin vanished. His eyes widened as the weight of the name finally landed. Then came the group message in Belt Brothers. "Yo Brad, that's the kid you filmed, right?" Another handler posted a screenshot of the video with the caption, "You're done bro, CEO caught you 4K. Brad dropped his phone. In the control tower, the terminal manager, who had ignored Jaden earlier when he requested priority luggage clarification, stood frozen as a new order arrived on his screen. Standby for inspection by owner's internal task force. Review all actions taken during Flight 972. Back on the plane, Claudia approached Jaden's seat, her voice barely audible. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, I didn't know. Had I?" Jaden closed the folder and looked at her evenly. "You didn't know," he said, not unkindly. "But you didn't ask either." Behind them, passengers were whispering furiously. "He's the owner? How old is he? Was that him in the video? Is this real? Ava stood and stepped beside Claudia. Mr. Carter will be initiating a full audit upon landing, she stated, addressing both crew and nearby passengers. Any mistreatment, breaches of protocol, or acts of discrimination will be documented. That includes commentary, conduct, and complicit silence. A few rows behind, the boy who had asked Jaden if he was scared earlier now turned to his mother. He's not just in first class, he said, eyes wide. He's in charge. His mother didn't answer. The man in the suit from 1A tried to approach, awkwardly adjusting his tie. Mr. Carter, he began about earlier. It's already been logged, Jaden replied, his voice neutral. Please return to your seat. From the cockpit, Marsh listened to the continuing buzz echoing through the plane, now overridden by a final statement from Arthur Denton. We welcome Mr. Carter to the helm of Legacy Airlines. Let this serve as a reminder. We rise by how we treat others, even when we think no one's watching. Jaden sat back in his seat, one hand resting lightly on the armrest, the other scrolling through live footage now being pulled from the plane's cabin feed, crowd reactions, and social media activity. The same voices that once mocked him now spoke in awe, confusion, and disbelief. But Jaden wasn't interested in vindication. He was interested in what came next. The wheels of Flight 972 touched down with a soft, reverberating thump that rippled through the fuselage like the punctuation at the end of a long, tense sentence. As the plane taxied toward the gate, the passengers shifted in their seats, murmuring among themselves with a strange mixture of reverence and disbelief, as if they'd all woken from a shared dream where nothing, absolutely nothing, had gone the way they expected. Jaden Carter remained in seat 1A, still calm, still quiet, still watching. His tablet displayed a live split screen. One side showed the plane's approach, while the other showed security camera footage from Terminal 4's ground operations room, where Brad Kent had just walked in to begin what he believed would be a standard debrief. Brad removed his reflective vest and dropped it on the break room table, rubbing the back of his neck while complaining to a colleague about soft passengers and overhyped social media nonsense. But as he reached into his locker for his keys, the door opened behind him, and two men entered, both in suits, both wearing laminated badges clipped neatly to their lapels. One of them stepped forward and extended a manila envelope toward Brad, who blinked in confusion. "What's this?" he asked, already sensing the shift in atmosphere. Bradley Kent, the man said formally, "This is a formal notice of termination from Legacy Airlines, effective immediately. You are hereby dismissed from your position due to multiple documented violations of conduct, including intentional damage to customer property, racial misconduct, and distribution of unauthorized recordings within restricted zones." Brad's jaw dropped open. "Wait, what?" he stammered, taking the envelope with shaking hands. You're kidding, right?" The second man spoke next, without emotion. "The incident has been reviewed by corporate legal, security, and our new executive office. The video has gone viral. Public sentiment is against you. We can no longer maintain your employment without reputational and legal risk." As Brad fumbled with the documents inside the envelope, his phone buzzed again and again, but this time the notifications were different. A clip of him laughing while dropping Jaden's suitcase had just hit 1 million views. Another post, this one from a verified activist page, had over 200,000 shares and climbing. A third was a stitched reaction video featuring Jaden's face beside Brad's smirk, with the caption, "This is what systemic bias looks like. We see you now." Brad looked up, face flushed and panicked. "It was a joke," he muttered. "I didn't mean," but the words fell flat against the reality closing in around him. Back inside the terminal, Claudia Marks stood outside Gate B12, her uniform pristine, but her expression tight. She'd been called in for a disciplinary hearing, an emergency session convened by the airline's new Equity and Conduct Board, established that very morning at the directive of Jaden Carter's legal team. The panel included HR executives, senior flight trainers, legal counsel, and Ava Blake herself, seated at the center with a tablet open to a full transcript of events, time-stamped, documented, and backed by cabin footage. Claudia walked into the room slowly, heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Miss Marks," Ava began without preamble. You're here today to answer for multiple actions taken during Flight 972, including the unjustified reassignment of Mr. Carter's seat, the public mishandling of a priority passenger, and failure to intervene in instances of in-flight harassment. Claudia swallowed hard. I wasn't aware of Mr. Carter's identity at the time, she said, voice low but steady. Had I known, Ava held up a hand. This isn't about what you didn't know. This is about what you chose to do. Regardless of who he was, your behavior showed a pattern of assumption, bias, and neglect of protocol. The fact that he's the majority owner only magnifies the consequences. A second panelist leaned forward. This airline is being restructured from the inside out. Transparency and accountability will be our foundation. That starts today with you. Claudia nodded slowly, shoulders heavy, her usually crisp posture now slightly slouched. I understand, she said quietly. Then understand this, Ava continued. Your employment will not be terminated. Yet. Instead, you and every crew member involved in Flight 972 will be enrolled in a mandatory 60-hour professional conduct and racial sensitivity training course, beginning immediately. You will complete this program at your own expense and submit to performance review evaluations after every flight for the next 6 months. Claudia blinked, stunned. 60 hours? Yes, Ava said, because education takes time, and so does change. Elsewhere in the operations center, a memo was sent out to all airport staff. Effective today, all Legacy Airlines personnel will undergo quarterly training on professional ethics, implicit bias, and equitable treatment. Non-compliance will result in disciplinary action. The news spread fast. Some staff muttered in frustration. Others nodded, knowing it was long overdue. Jaden's face, now recognized by every terminal employee, had become the symbol of that shift. He hadn't made a scene. He had made a standard. Downstairs, Brad was escorted from the premises by security, his badge deactivated, his locker emptied. He tried to argue, plead even, but no one responded. One security officer simply said, "You went viral for the wrong reason, man. That doesn't go away." As he was let out through the employee exit, a group of baggage handlers watched quietly. Kenny, standing off to the side, crossed his arms and said to no one in particular, he thought no one was watching. One handler replied, "Someone always is." Back on the plane, as passengers disembarked, many tried to avoid eye contact with Jaden as they passed his seat. Some offered brief nods. A few whispered apologies. Most said nothing. Jaden simply remained seated, allowing every expression to pass without comment, but noting them all. When Claudia passed by last, still dressed in professionalism but stripped of the illusion of authority, Jaden looked up. "How was the hearing?" he asked, not sarcastic, genuinely curious. Claudia paused, eyes heavy. "Necessary," she replied. "And overdue." Jaden nodded once. "Then it's a start." Ava approached and handed his coat. "Board's assembled," she said quietly. "They're ready when you are." Jaden stood, adjusted his sleeves, and walked down the jet bridge, not as a teenager cast aside, but as the architect of the system that had just been forced to reckon with its own reflection. A month had passed since Flight 972 landed, and Jaden Carter redefined not only an airline, but the entire perception of what power, dignity, and patience could look like under pressure. In that time, Legacy Airlines underwent an unprecedented cultural reset, from the tone of its corporate memos to the language used in flight safety videos. Every employee, from the highest-ranking executive to the newest baggage handler, now passed through a training facility designed not just to educate, but to reorient. And at the center of that transformation was a program Jaden had quietly named the Ground Rebuild Initiative, a hybrid of community service, ethics rehabilitation, and professional mentorship that prioritized second chances without ignoring accountability. It was through this very program that Brad Kent, once a face of systemic pettiness and cruelty, found himself standing nervously at the edge of a community center gymnasium in Southside Chicago, holding a clipboard and adjusting his new, plain gray staff shirt emblazoned not with the airline's wings, but with the humble logo of Lift the Youth, a nonprofit focused on helping disadvantaged teenagers find mentorship through aviation. The apology had not come easily. It had started with silence, days of reflection while watching his name cycle through the media, accompanied by screenshots of him mid-laugh beside Jaden's shattered suitcase. It progressed to shame when he saw comments from kids who'd been bullied at school for looking different, and how they now looked up to Jaden as a symbol of grace under fire. Then it turned to a letter, typed, printed, and finally hand-delivered to the Carter Holdings office, addressed simply, "To the one I wronged." Jaden hadn't responded immediately. Instead, his assistant had followed up 2 weeks later with a phone call that began with, "Mr. Carter has reviewed your statement," and ended with, "He has a proposal for you, should you choose to show your sincerity in action." And now here Brad stood, in front of 20 inner-city teens, mostly black and Latino, each holding a notebook and staring at him with a mix of skepticism and cautious curiosity. "I used to be where you think your enemies are," he began, not rehearsed, just raw. "I worked at the airport. I judged people. I hurt people with my words, with my actions, because I didn't know better, because I didn't want to know better." One of the students raised his hand. "So why are you here now?" Brad took a breath. "Because the person I disrespected didn't throw me away. He gave me a path back, not a free pass. A harder road, actually, but one that lets me make things right." In a room across town, Claudia stood before a different group. This one composed of fellow flight staff, gathered for a special session hosted by the airline's Diversity Council. She'd returned to work after completing the 60-hour course, not with pride, but with clarity. Her opening words echoed softly across the space. "I used to think professionalism was just about posture, speech, and poise. But it's also about who you protect, who you listen to, and who you exclude. I failed all of that, until someone made me look in the mirror." That someone was Jaden. She never named him publicly, but everyone in the room knew. She shared stories now of checking herself when judging passengers, of calling out biases in staff meetings, of mentoring young flight attendants of color who previously had no senior ally. One of those attendants, Melissa, who had once stood silently while Rebecca ignored the Johnson family in another infamous flight, now co-led the same sessions, proudly telling new recruits, "If you're not lifting someone up, you're part of what's holding them down." Meanwhile, Jaden continued to operate quietly behind the scenes. He declined interviews. He refused book deals. He focused instead on building infrastructure, more scholarships through the Carter Foundation, more leadership programs that funneled students of color into aviation schools, legal internships, and business incubators. The message was never about vengeance. It was about structure. It was about visibility. It was about what happens when someone who knows what it's like to be looked over builds platforms no one else can ignore. The once mocked footage of Jaden being sent to sit next to a plane's toilet had become part of a national PSA campaign titled "See the Whole Seat," reminding staff and travelers alike that every passenger brings more than what's printed on their ticket. At the center of this storm of change, Jaden's own presence remained steady and calm. He visited the youth centers anonymously, often listening more than speaking. He reviewed new hires quietly. He sat in the back of training sessions, letting the words sink into the culture without needing to brand them. But every so often, someone would recognize him, and they wouldn't ask for selfies. They'd say, "Thank you," or, more powerfully, "I'm here because of what you did." Brad was now 6 weeks into his term at Lift the Youth. He led mock luggage check simulations with students, taught them how to spot a security threat, and, most ironically, how to handle premium luggage with respect and caution. But more than anything, he shared his story as a warning: what happens when you assume the worst in people, and how your worst moment doesn't have to be your final one. At the end of each day, he filled out a reflection log, signed and scanned to Carter Holdings for review, not for punishment, but to track growth. One log entry simply read, "I didn't throw any bags today. I carried them." At Legacy's headquarters, Claudia now sat on the Employee Ethics Committee, vetting new inclusivity protocols. She reviewed hundreds of employee stories, some haunting, some hopeful. One entry stood out, a new hire who said, "I joined because I saw someone like me own the sky." Her eyes stung as she read it, and she smiled, small but genuine. Jaden had never demanded apologies. He'd only offered the chance to earn a future that could justify them. And in that way, the boy they once humiliated had quietly rewritten the company's soul, not with fury, but with focus. As winter approached and the company prepared for its annual review summit, a surprise was added to the itinerary. A keynote speaker named Jaden Carter. The room, filled with executives, staff, trainees, and community leaders, rose in silence as he took the stage, not because of status, but because of the story they now all shared. He looked around the room, then at the massive screen behind him, where a looping image played. A suitcase, once shattered, now restored, standing upright beside a young man holding it, not as baggage, but as a banner. And then, with a voice steady and certain, he said, "Don't ask who deserves a seat. Ask what you do with yours." If you found this story powerful or inspiring, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next twist-filled journey. We'd love to know, what part of Jaden's story surprised you the most? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We're reading every single one.